real fired up over Harry Potter. It's the movie guy, the guy with the weird eyes. Yeah, he
And
has.
David Tennant's in that movie very briefly.
He's got like the real one in the little box.
Yeah, by the way,
Dude, you know you have to put your nose up, right?
Well,
Your entire nose.
so they might as well.
Yeah, I mean, like, who's the actor who plays Kamal?
Ralph Fiennes.
Yeah, he's really cool though.
Yeah. And his brother has a club talent. Or did he have a club talent?
Pretty sure that was just one time for a movie.
He's the one missing. He's the one missing. I don't get how they got him.
They did.
he's a very, very strong
They found like clear face paint.
Clear face paint.
No, he's a good method actor. He's like,
Clear face paint is what James just said.
James, did you ever think that maybe it was just like CGI? And then this nose is there.
How do you computer generate notes?
Passion. Nick, this be honest.
Nick, how do you computer generate notes?
James, you put like, you obviously put a fake imaginary nose there. This is invisible.
like in real life,
No, okay, so the actor, right? He had a tragic accident.
tragic nose losing accident.
Yeah. And then they're like, wow, Voldemort had this big, beautiful, luscious nose. And now what are we going to do? But they already paid him. And he's got a contract. And no noses fit him because the accident was so horrendous. Therefore, Voldemort had no nose. What do you, like,
Was that bad before the nose? Like after the nose, you could see it.
no, it was just bad the whole time. And it happened.
Testing.
I actually want to know what his. Because you know that when you have like computer generation, how stupid does Ralph Fiennes look walking around with his dots on his face? Compared to
It's probably not as dumb as the guy who played all of this. It's probably like stupid.
Andy Serkis, C-I-R-C-U. You can't spell Serkis. And no space.
That was such a good surprise.
Andy Serkis is in our lips.
Like, that'd be way better than regular Kyle.
Andy Serkis.
Like, imagine all the things we could do. It's just regular stuff, but with Andy Serkis.
Yo, like say what Food just said, but say it in a color.
And he could. Can you do that, Kyle? Try it. Just say anything. Read 50 Shades of Grey as well. No, I didn't say re-elected.
I had to get the right tone in.
Okay. Nice.
No, my cheeks are still. Like every time I.
Do you have noticeable holes back there? Or like,
I don't know.
I still have a hole back there.
I can feel like okay, so maybe so my
It's so flat.
yeah, it's flat.
It'll fall.
Like multiple.
Yeah, it didn't fall off, it got ripped off in an industrial warehouse. Horrible. Yeah. How conceivable would it be to like rip your nose off or like by accident? What would happen?
I don't think you can rip your nose off.
I think you could. It's a real question.
So you would be.
I know it right here.
Oh my god, that's why he hates Harry Potter, because maybe Harry Potter was like,
Did you ever see that video? There's a comic where it's like someone here like gave the subtitles and it's like got your nose and then Voldemort is just standing there like angry as fuck. Oh my god.
Because it's using a 24-hour time. What a fucking knee slapper. You should feel bad. This is gonna be fun. Does it hurt?
I did get screwed in the juice back from here.
Okay. Does it hurt a lot?
Oh yeah, I'm hard.
I want your demo.
First of the end, technically.
You want a piece of baby orange? Baby orange? Oh, Dylan? Dude, what you guys doing to Dylan? What the fuck? Yo, Dylan.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this Letters in Arts and Social Science presentation today. And I'll note that this is our final Letters in Arts for the year. And next week, Social Science will be presenting Jeff Pereira. For Letters in Arts, we've really appreciated the support from the Canada Council for the Arts, the London Arts Council, and our own college. And in particular, we're very appreciative of you guys, your support. Today our guest is Kamal Al-Solaylee, and I'm going to ask my colleague, Professor Mahfoud, to introduce our guest.
Remember this. Okay, good afternoon. Again, my name is Haytham. Kamal Al-Solaylee is the author of Intolerable, a memoir of extremes. It's published by HarperCollins, 2012. A finalist in CBC's 2015 Canada Reads, where the theme was one book to break barriers. The book certainly breaks several barriers. Kamal Al-Solaylee has been theatre critic for the Globe and Mail and I Weekly, written on film and TV, covered American response to the war in Iraq, worked as production editor to the response on report of Business Magazine, and written features for the National Post. He is currently the director of the undergraduate journalism program at Ryerson University. Born in Aden, Yemen, Kamal Al-Solaylee lives in Toronto, I believe with his dog Chester. Passed away. Okay, sorry about that. I have come across Kamal Al-Solaylee's work in the summer of 2013 when searching for text to include in our introduction to the humanities reading package. When I found his famous From Bikini to Burqa, the piece immediately stuck in my mind, not only because of its telling title, but also because of the time and geography it covers. Beirut is one of the cities that Al-Solaylee's drifting life forced upon them in their search for security and stability. Beirut was also where I was living when a Solaylee family settled in it. This coincidence stunned me beyond belief when I learned that the 11 Solaylee family members lived in the same Yaqub Yaqubian building I've been living in since its inception. I took this shot in 1972. As the family drifted from Beirut to Cairo because of the outbreak of the Lebanese Civil War, I moved to Damascus, then to London, England. By the time I finished my PhD in England in 1989, Kamal moves to it to begin his. By 1994, we both voluntarily end up in snow-covered but warm, welcoming Canada. Today, in 2016, 41 years after leaving Beirut and leaving that building, Kamal and I meet face-to-face at Fanshawe College. What a small world. Al-Solaylee, I'm quoting here, reaches back to his parents' history from Yemen in the 1960s through Beirut, Cairo, and then back to Yemen through the Arab Spring. In agonizing, heart-wrenching detail. Along the way, he illuminates the complex struggles that have shaped the region all through his very personal vantage point. The book is mesmerizing and a must-read. In the current vicious mess consuming the world, particularly North Africa and the Middle East, Intolerable offers, for those who are concerned, numerous ideas to engage in constructive, thoughtful dialogue outside the rigid box of tradition. Please welcome Kamal to address you.
Thank you, Heidi, for that wonderful introduction. And yes, I was a child in this very building. Haven't seen it for a long time.
I was in grade 7.
Okay.
In JK.
Is the volume okay?
The volume.
Okay. And
This is the building rundown. Sorry, Kamal.
oh right, yeah. This is today, like recent.
Today,
Yeah.
and this is the original blueprint which I found.
Wow.
Also, I have seen it when I was a child. I've seen that blueprint.
Right.
What a small world.
Small world, and it's a vanishing world as well. That world doesn't exist anymore. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for coming, and happy St. Patrick's Day before I forget. I want to start by thanking Roy, especially. Where's Roy? Where is he? Oh, there he is. There he is. I have taken part in many, many events in my lifetime, both as a former theater critic at the Globe and in support of my book Intolerable. But I have never, ever been booked as far in advance as I have for this Letters in Art Society reading series. I believe, Roy, you started a conversation with me in January of 2015. So that's 14 months ago when he first emailed me saying, would I be interested in coming here in March of 2016. I remember saying, like, who knows where we'll be? I'll do my best, and hopefully my class schedule will work out. So you guys, Financial Culture, really organized. So it puts me to shame because I am at heart, even though I've written a book of literary fiction, nonfiction, I am at heart a journalist. And I was working on my presentation right up until 11:30 last night. Just like right down to the deadline because otherwise I can't function unless I'm panicking. But I'm here with you this afternoon, not as a journalist, but as a book author, and to be specific, a memoirist. In May of 2012, HarperCollins Canada published my first book as an author, Intolerable, a Memoir of Extremes, which went on to win the Toronto Book Award and got nominated for Canada Reads and the Hilary Weston Prize for Nonfiction. So for the past 4 years, I've been living with the meanings, the pains, the anguish of writing about one's life, one's immediate family, my successes, my failures, my betrayals. I'd like to start by providing a couple of contexts for the book. First, just tell you what's it about, and then why and how it came to be. And I'm going to put my phone here, not to check my Facebook, but because I don't know how many of you wear watches anymore. I just stopped wearing watches, so I want to make sure we're overstaying my welcome. I'm going to make sure that I'm on time. My book, in essence, is an attempt to chart the physical and emotional journey that I've taken from my roots in a small town in South Yemen called Aden, to becoming a journalist, author, and academic in Toronto. But it's also a story of what happened to my family and the Arab world, as both have embraced a form of religious intolerance that was unknown a generation or two earlier. I write in my book about how political Islam infiltrated our happy secular family when my oldest brother fell under the spell of the Muslim Brotherhood. He immediately began to curtail the freedoms that my sisters enjoyed and thought would last. It began with comments about their hair, their makeup, then it escalated to their movements, phone calls, friends. When the family relocated from Cairo to Sana'a in North Yemen in the early 80s, the transformation of my sisters was complete. Lives that were once full of promise and hope became mired in a legacy of devotion, of senseless grudge against the Western world, of intolerance towards anyone who was different. It's clearly a big story, and it's a story of a large family and a story of an Arab world of millions of people. But I chose to write it as a family memoir, as a personal memoir. And I always wonder why I made that decision, I should say. And I wish I had a kind of a profound answer to give you. I wish I could tell you that, I wanted to let the world know about an injustice or a desire to rectify a misconception, that it's a kind of social justice mission. But that's not how this book came to be. The idea for the book came to me after a particularly distressing visit to my family in Sana'a, Yemen in 2006. It was my first trip in about 5 years. I had already been living in Canada for about 10 years. And I couldn't get over the rapid decline in the material and emotional lives of my family. I also started to notice that disturbing level of religiosity. The visit put into focus the huge gap between my life in Toronto, which is a very safe, privileged, even spoiled life, and that of my family. I want just to give you an illustration of that point. That trip was in April 2006, and I returned to Toronto after 3 weeks. And within a few days, I was still working at the Globe and Mail as a theater critic, and I went to New York to review the Broadway musical The Drowsy Chaperone, a Canadian musical that opened about the Roaring *20s. And nothing could have been more strikingly different between the world I left back home 3-4 days earlier and flying to New York just to be at the opening of the musical. It was days before I knew a complete depression had set in. A friend suggested that I write that experience, which is how the book originated, in sadness and depression. At first I thought I would just write a magazine article for the Walrus, like 5,000 words, but as with almost everything in life, fate changed my plans. I met the man who would later become my agent, John Pierce, at a friend's party. He asked if I ever thought of writing a book, and I said, well, actually I have this article that I'm thinking I'll just write it as an article and see how it, if there's any good response, then I'll turn it into a book. And he said, no, don't do the article, just go straight into a book. So I spent 2 years developing a proposal, so that's roughly from 2007, 2009, that went out in the spring of 2009 to all major Canadian publishers. All major Canadian publishers turned it down. Nobody wanted it. And I understand that some classes here read my Globe and Mail article from bikinis to burqas, which I had nothing to do with that headline. It was the copy editor who put that headline on it. But it was sketchy, which is in fact was a condensed version of my book proposal. I decided just to run something in the Globe in early 2000 to see if that might pique some publishers' interest. Since Yemen was in the news at the time, there was all this talk about the shoe bomber, and suddenly everyone was talking about Yemen as the new Afghanistan. So I thought, well, I have to be opportunistic about it and just run something in the Globe and see if that helps. It did, and I ended up with a book deal after a few weeks. But I also stared at a blank screen for almost 8 months before I could write a single word. It was actually the most torturous thing I had to go through. It's easy to get carried away with the idea of having a book deal, a research trip. I went back to Lebanon and Beirut and Cairo and tracked back the family history and met up with some of my siblings and talked about it. But at the end of the day, if you're a writer, some of you, I hope, plan to become writers, and you have to sit down in front of your computer and put your bum on seat and write it. This is how it works. Or, as another friend described it, is having a homework for the rest of your life. So every night after work, you go home. If you're a writer, you have something you want to write. I froze, completely froze. I couldn't write anything. A whole book. I mean, I was used to just those 700, 1,000 word Global Mail articles that I've, for years and years, have been churning them out 3 or 4 a week. The real challenge, however, once I got over that and started writing, is writing the idea of writing a family memoir. And this is really what I would like to talk to you about. For one thing, I kept asking myself this question over and over again. Why on earth would anyone want to read about my life? I'm a complete nobody. Who wants to buy a book and spend hardbacks like $30 about someone whose only claim to fame is that he's the theater critic of the Globe and Mail? This is not the usual Canadian self-deprecation or modesty, but an existential question that I understand even well-known memoir and writers of autobiography face. I'm kind of glad I have that self-doubt, because by asking myself that question and by looking for an answer, I found a structure and a way into the book. And the answer came. I cast myself in a supporting role in the drama of my own life. Instead of making the book about me, I turned the gaze, or at least part of the gaze, outward into the family, and from there into the Arab-Muslim world from which I came. I also sharpened the narrative on my sexuality as a gay man, further setting me apart on one extreme from the world of my family and respectability on the other. But that didn't really resolve the moral dilemma of writing a memoir, when many of your family members whose stories you are telling, or you're trying to tell, are alive and can and will hear about their representations in your book. Imagine if you wrote a diary and then the whole world was able to read it. Imagine if someone had access to your diary and published it. These are issues that are far from clear-cut. And while fabricating stories is definitely off limits, all memoirists must contend with the fact that memory is not infallible. That the very fact of retelling stories involves reframing the narrative, editing it to fit into the thrust of your tale. What I've written is my truth, but I acknowledge that others may have different perceptions of the same truth. As an example, I based sections about my family's life before my birth and the early childhood on a combination of stories that I've heard growing up, interviews with 2 of my sisters, family documents and photos that survived moving from one country to the next. Surely, somewhere along the way, a story or 2 were embellished, edited subjectively, or omitted. All I can say is that I've done the very best I could balancing all sources and presenting the most probable version of the events, not the most definitive or the most exhaustive. And that's a question that we in the world of creative nonfiction face all the time. And yet, all of that paled in comparison to writing about my own mother and father. Both of them were dead by the time I started the book. In fact, my mother died. But in fact, when my mother died, I was finally able to completely accept the fact that I might write a book about her life. How can I begin to do the decades-long struggle to raise a family of 11 children from one extreme, wealth, to another, economic struggle? My mother was illiterate, so she left no written record of her life whatsoever. She never read. She never learned to read or write in Arabic or any other language. My father, on the other hand, was an archivist who kept photos, deeds, business files. He made my life much easier. Between her silence and his meticulously preserved history, I had to negotiate a space where the long-suffering mother and child factory that she was doesn't get erased from history again. I wanted to make sure that I do justice to my mother. I wanted to show how a very simple woman in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s navigated her way through the treacherous Middle Eastern politics of decolonization, nationalism, fundamentalism, and civil wars, and managed to raise 11 children along the way. For the record, Yemen, where my family lives now, has gone through 2 civil wars in 20 years before the book's publication. The third one started about a year ago. It is still raging as I speak right now. So I wanted to give you a sense of what my parents' life was like. And the reason I want to do that is because I'm not talking about my great-great-great-grandparents. I'm not talking about some ancestral history. I'm talking about the mother who gave birth to me, the now current university professor at Rice University, who's standing in front of you and talking to students in Penshap and colleagues in Penshap College. So I'm going to read something from the introduction. I'm going to read from a couple of pieces from the book, but I'm going to read something very short from the introduction, just because I want to give you a sense. And as Haytham said, what a welcoming country Canada is, because we all come from such different backgrounds and bring in different histories. And I think mine definitely qualifies as something outside the norm. I am the son of an illiterate shepherdess who was married off at the age of 14 and had 11 children by the time she was 33. My mother, Sophia, was born and raised in a part of my home country of Yemen that is still better known today as the birthplace of the Bin Laden clan. When she and my father were married in the fall of 1945 in Aden, then a British protectorate, he was fresh off serving a stint in the Allied Army, and she had just reached puberty mere months before. A year earlier, she once confided to me she had listened to the radio for the first time in her life, and her older sister had talked of something called cinema. The voice of an Egyptian singer whom she identified later as Kulthum flowed through the airwaves when she walked past a little makeshift workstation in the hills of Hadramaut. Another Egyptian artist was starring in an early musical melodrama. Little did Sophia know then that her father was waiting for her first period, her first tentative step towards womanhood, to pair her off with the son of a co-worker of his in the civil court where both men served as guards. My mother would always muse about the fact that her father-in-law, my grandfather, kept watch over criminals, since he himself wasn't run away from justice, having killed a man near the northern Yemeni town of Taiz as part of a long-standing tribal vendetta. So, as you can see, I'm the grandson of a murderer. Indeed, Abdullah ended up in Aden in the early 1910s while on the run from his victim's family. He may have been 16 or 17 at the time. There was no way of telling his exact age, as birth certificates did not exist at the time in Yemen's history. He adopted the name Al-Solaylee, see how it's spelled there, from a small tribe that offered him shelter on their land near the border that divided what was then North and South Yemen. His family name, by all rights mine, is Kamal. Actually, he lived to be 110, I believe. I remember seeing him right up until before I left Yemen in '88, and he was past, certainly over 100 years old. No one knows for sure. Sorry? Well, you look great for 110, so that's wonderful. So I want to read just a little bit about my mother. When I last saw her in 2006, she was far gone into Alzheimer's, but still found it perplexing that I owned a dog in Toronto. Get rid of him, she pleaded with me, without ever pronouncing his name. I could no more get rid of Chester than you could give up one of your own children, I responded, knowing that appealing to her sense as a mother could still be effective. She nodded and drifted off into an incoherent story, the details of which I can't remember. To her, dogs were those vicious wild animals that occasionally attacked her sheep and bitter as a young shepherdess, or the dirty, rabid ones that roamed the back streets of Cairo. Please come in here, because you probably know what I mean by that. And frighten her children every time they get close. What struck me then was her ability to bridge the gaps between her lives as a young girl, a middle-aged mother, and now an elderly woman. She was a pro at it. Her entire married life was a desperate and difficult attempt at bridging gaps. In 1949, my father decided to study business in London, England for a year. Say London, England, only here because you so that no one will confuse it with London, Ontario. Leaving her behind with the first 3 children. She was 18. When my dad returned from England and started a business of buying and selling rundown property, that we call now flipping, he had developed a taste for a sophisticated English life. Until weeks before his death in 1995, he was rarely seen in public without a shirt and tie. Traditional Yemeni clothes were strictly for home. He introduced cutlery to a household that enjoyed eating with their hands. My dad would often tell us a story of how, after several attempts to get his wife used to a knife and fork, he settled on training her to eat with a spoon, at least when they had company. In writing this book, I discovered that the driving factor of my life, which I describe as a life on the run, has been my sexuality. Being gay is so essential to my identity, to my life, that I can't even think of one where I'm not. I often say that being gay was the best gift that life gave me. I really won the genetic lottery in my family. It allowed me to experience difference. Because sometimes I think I would have been a very horrible straight man. Just leave me on that one. My gay self made me more aware on the challenges and beauty of being a human being. I like to think I'm more empathetic because of my sexuality. In fact, I replaced the Arab identity with a gay one. I didn't realize I was doing that until I wrote this book. Which brings me to the place of Canada and Toronto, to which the book is dedicated. This is my home, and in many ways, my book, Intolerable, is a love letter to Canada. I've been extremely lucky in landing in a country that did and still does welcome newcomers. It was love at first sight. Something told me on my second full day in Toronto that this would be home, that I could stop running now. It is my freedom. And the second part I'd like to read, just very briefly, is from that moment, which, and if there are any people or newcomers into Canada would remember that moment of arrival and the first time you walk into your new home. I fell in love with Toronto instantly. Once I cleared immigration, the nice officer actually said, "Welcome to Canada." I felt that I was indeed welcome to this city. No one asked me if I had a history of infectious diseases. That was taken care of in the medical test I had done in England as part of my visa application. The first ride on the Toronto subway on my second day was a revelation. I was accustomed to being the only person of color on the buses in Nottingham, where I did my PhD, or in certain parts of Liverpool, where my extended family lived. Now to be surrounded by so many people who spoke different languages and came from almost every part of the globe instantly laid to rest any subconsciousness I might have had about being fresh off the boat immigrant. Even after 8 years of absorbing local life in England, I still felt like an outsider. In less than 10 days in Toronto, I was sharing an apartment with a gay man and a straight woman in the Little Italy neighborhood of the city, which looked both refined and bohemian, just like one of those exterior shots in the American sitcoms I had watched for many years in Cairo and in England. The clincher for me was the stop, a mere 5 minutes walk from a new home on Markham Street for the Wellesley bus number 94, which took me directly to Toronto's gay village at Church in Wellesley. None of this would strike readers who have lived in Toronto or other Western democracies as anything special. But after Cairo and Sana'a, where I lived a furtive and then closeted life, and despite the time in England, that bus ride had all the significance of a moon landing, a transportive experience, literally. But as I write in the book, the Middle East has a way of catching up with you, no matter how fast you run. On the morning of 9/11, that idyllic chapter of my life came to an end. If you're male, Arab, Muslim of a certain age, I'm no longer at that age, I'm too old, I'm 52, I'm too old to be a terrorist, to be suspected of terrorism now. But at the time, I was still in my 30s. If you're that age, life means suspicions, racial profiling, adrift from the mainstream. As the so-called clash of civilizations was happening, my family began an irreversible slide into hardline Islam. What was an already complicated relationship became increasingly more so, since I dealt with it not by accepting who they are, but by distancing myself from them. One of my sisters said she'd like to visit me in Toronto shortly after 9/11, but I insisted that if she wants to come here, she has to take off her veil. I am not walking down the street with you wearing that veil, I told her. And she refused, because she felt that was part of her, so she didn't come. I still have regrets about that decision. It could have been her own cry for help, her own desire to escape, but it fell on my deaf ears. I believe I betrayed my family, especially my sisters, and abandoned them when they needed me the most. And the events of the Arab Spring and the civil war in Yemen last year only exacerbated that. And in the book, I talk in greater detail about that, what I call memoir's guilt. I wish I could tell you that writing the book helped me understand the choices, and I put choices in quotation mark, that my family, male or female, have made. I don't believe they actually had any choices. I should probably say reactions, responses, because that's more accurate. I must say that I don't blame or accuse my family of anything. I don't blame anyone in the Middle East necessarily. What I'm trying to do is reconstruct the sequence of events that led to where they and I are now, worlds apart. Strangely enough, the clarity that came with writing the book didn't help mitigate my heartbreak or made the gap between us any less dramatic. About 3 years ago, I wrote a piece for the Huffington Post that I think captures how I felt about writing a family memoir, and what I call the memoir is guilt, and what that all means once your book is out in the marketplace. So indulge me, I'm going to quote myself, because I felt that my thoughts at the time still stand. If writing about your family's history is like inviting the ghosts of your past for an extended sleepover, sharing that story with the public means opening the doors to your house of horror. There will be no more secrets now. Paradoxically, for a book that is a tell-all, I have become more guarded about my own privacy and that of my family after it came out. I'm overprotective of their stories and mine like never before. Now, it's one thing for these stories to be in my book, another to have them recounted or reviewed by someone else. So you can imagine my anguish when it was selected for Canada Reads, because that meant a much higher profile for the book on a national level, and then in a national broadcast, 5 panelists going at each other and trying to attack the book that each one is defending. Luckily, I was away, so I missed part of that, all of that. But life is complicated, and the passage of time and the overwhelmingly positive response to the book have eased some of those doubts. When the book was first published and I received the box of it, I remember that moment very well. I remember thinking, here's a noble failure waiting to happen. But it's not the awards or critical reception that I cherish, but the many emails, messages on Facebook, and face-to-face feedback that I have heard over the years. For many readers in Canada, this book is their window, only window perhaps, into the lives of millions of Yemeni citizens caught in the cycle of poverty, war, and religious extremism. People who, but for the grace of the powers that be, would have included me. But I also know that the narrative of the outsider seeking a place to call home somewhere to fit in has resonated with readers from different backgrounds and cultures. It is my belief in storytelling that prompted me to finish my second book, which, while not biographical, collects stories of global migrants from around the world and honors their journeys. The book is called Brown, and it uses skin color, brown skin color, as a code for displacement and crisis. It comes out in 6 weeks. If I'm lucky, I may get another invitation in a few years to come back and talk about it. I'll be optimistic and say, until then, finish our college. Thank you so much for inviting me. I believe we have time for about 15 minutes for questions. Okay, go ahead and speak up, sir.
How did the decolonization of Yemen impact you and your family?
The decolonization. Negatively, because my dad was actually working for the British at the time. So in the part of, like Aden was a British protectorate and not a colony, and there's a slight difference. So we were kicked out of the country, and that began, and all our property and bank accounts were nationalized or confiscated. So that began, that's why we ended up in Beirut and then Cairo, looking for a place to live. So, so it had impacted my father particularly. I mean, he was such a colonial subject. He was pro-England, and to his dying day, he sort of had this love for everything English and British. But obviously, as I grew, as I went to school and began to understand what was going on, I also understood how complex that relationship between the colony and the colonizer and colonized, and that he was living on borrowed time, because eventually the thrust of history was towards decolonization. We're talking about the 50s and 60s, and in many ways he chose not to believe that his turn was next. Which is in many ways is sad, but also is extremely tragic in this case, because in 1967 he lost everything he owned, and he died in 1995, 30 years later, not having been able to work again, really. I mean, not having able to achieve anything again. He was a broken man for the rest of his life.
How has your book impacted upon your family relationship, your parenting?
I haven't been since the book came out, because there'd been the Arab Spring, and now there's a civil war. Sorry? No, I probably it wouldn't be very safe for me to go out right now in general. I think my family was very upset about the gay content. They were not particularly bothered about anything else. And I think the way the book was reported in Yemen was largely this sort of raving homosexual thing and talking about his life. And they were upset about that. But kind of, it's amazing what, particularly the current civil war that started last year, brought us much closer together. Like I call it a relief. And I want to make sure that they're okay. And in many ways, this book has drifted into the background. It's no longer part of our conversation. But at the time, it could have created a serious rift. They haven't read it, by the way, so you know. Any other questions?
Yes.
Go ahead again. Sorry. Sorry, you go ahead and then.
Being gay, did you feel repressed before you moved to England?
In Yemen, definitely, because I traveled back and forth and around the Middle East. So I grew up in Beirut and then Cairo, and then went to Yemen for 2 years. In Cairo, and I talk about this in the book, when I was sort of your age, I guess, in my 20s, I had discovered Cairo's underground gay scene, and I was like 20 and honing and young, and just wanted to take advantage of everything. But then my family went back and relocated to Yemen, and it was like going back centuries, because it's still a country that punishes homosexuality by public lashings, and the punishment for being caught, what was sodomy laws, was death. And I actually was really scared, and I was completely closeted. I just lived there for 2 years and left and never looked back.
What part of living in Nottingham, England, wasn't the kind of safe reception that you felt in Canada?
That's a very good question. When you live in like sort of outside of London, I mean, now we're talking about the 80s and 90s. So visible minorities were really minorities, were very small. So I'd be on the bus and would be the only person of color on that bus. There were a number of racially motivated attacks on particularly Pakistani. And in that time, or in general, the way I look, no one could tell apart who's an Arab, who's Indian, who's Pakistani. That's one thing. There's this, I mean, I do love England and do love my English friends, but there's a certain kind of English. The English, in a way, expects you, rightly or wrongly, to sort of to live, to kind of live the way they live. I mean, there's a kind of sense that this is our way, fit in. Whereas I found that Canada has, the multicultural model was far more inclusive and allowed people to kind of claim their culture while also being part of the collective whole. But there's much more acceptance of being from a different background, different culture. But mostly just walking down the street and not feeling like I'm the only one who looks the way I am was a huge relief for me. And that's why I mentioned that thing at the subway. Because, you know, when you come to Canada, like, I've never been to Canada before I immigrated here, and you get the images of the Mountie and the sort of Nordic-looking white blonde, and you know it's got immigration, but you go to a city like Toronto, and I mean, Toronto is on the cusp of becoming 50% visible minority, which is also part of my next book, and to me that was quite. I felt welcomed in a way that I never felt at home in England, let's put it that way.
And I have the same
Right.
assessment stuff. I have
Yeah.
the same experience. Whereas when I stepped into Canada, I felt
This is in an instant, yeah. There is something very welcoming about this country, and I'd like it to remain so, and far more inclusive. Yeah.
What is your outlook on Islam?
I'm sorry.
What is your outlook on Islam?
I'm sorry. I didn't answer the question.
Islam. What do you feel?
Oh, okay. I feel completely alienated from it. I don't feel. It's strange because I feel like I speak on its behalf a lot as a journalist, or I'm asked to comment. Like whenever there's a terrorist attack there or something, people will say, "Let's get Kamal to talk about this." However, I don't feel that it is part of my current life. Certainly, I mean, I've absorbed it. I grew up in that world. I feel a stronger connection to Arabic culture than I do feel to Islam, and I do think even though they overlap, they're different things. They're two different things, but I don't necessarily feel. I don't identify as a Muslim in public. But I say I'm from a Muslim family. Sorry. Either one of us.
I was just going to ask you, identify as Canadian.
I do. Exclusively, yes. I mean, before 9/11, I would say I would identify just as a Canadian, period. I think after 9/11, there was a need to just say I'm an Arab Canadian, just because there's a need to speak and try to speak on behalf, not speak on behalf, but to try to represent a different point of view about what it means to be Arab and living in Canada. I mean, we're here in London, Ontario, was one of the largest Arab community in Canada, and there was a kind of, for me, there was a political imperative in saying Arab Canadian, hyphenated for the first. I don't always like this hyphenation, but I felt like I had to. Oh, it was. I was relieved, to be perfectly honest. This. I mean, as you can tell from the plot summary, it's not a sitcom. It's a very difficult book to write. It's a very emotional book to write. I felt really invested in it. It was actually kind of refreshing to talk about other people's misery for a change, as opposed to mine, and to look at it with a certain kind of distance. And the distance is, I mean, the book talks about other experience for other people who are called brown, whether they're Latinos or Arabs or, but I focused on migrant workers. So it was an socioeconomic class, and even though we share the same skin color and in many cases the same religion, and have a different socioeconomic group, that I am not an undocumented worker. I am not an illegal immigrant. I'm not a refugee. So there was a certain kind of distance in writing this book that I went out of my way to create that. Even though I do mention like this tiny little biographical thread in the book, I found comfort and relief in having to write about other people, even though the stories are really heartbreaking. And I don't mean to say that callously, but after writing Intolerable, the last thing I want to do, I mean, somebody says you do a follow-up, like update the narrative. I'm not touching that book again. This is actually probably, since my book comes out in 6 weeks, this is kind of a ceremonial final reading from Intolerable, and I'm sort of move on and do something. We'll be talking a lot about my new book. Sorry, this might be it.
If you could say one thing to say to people that are oppressing the people in this, what would you say?
The people who are oppressing people in it, what would I say? Go oppress yourself. I would actually ask him to read history a little bit more, and although this is a point of contention, that Arabic, like Islamic history and Arabic history is born in violence, and it has a lot of it. So, but I would ask them to look back at the glory days of of previous Muslim civilizations and see how far we've come down since those days, and yeah, that's what I would do. But I hope I never have to come face to face with like Bashar al-Assad or something.
It's good to be compared to ISIS.
Okay, yes, we had this open lunch, but okay, I disagree, but anyway. Okay. Right. Sure. Read as many books as you can. Read as much as you can. You can never become a writer if you don't read. That's the first thing. And I tell that to my own journalism students who are lazy and they don't like to read very much. And they only like to read journalism.
I'm not lazy.
No, our yours is the best. I mean, thank you. They're all here on St. Patrick's Day. That's awesome. I would say be comfortable in your own voice. Never try to write to impress, and never try to write in order to sound more intelligent, to sound more impressive than you are. I wrote this book so that everybody who has access to it can understand it. It's meant to be accessible. I could have turned this into an academic, jargon-riddled history book, but I chose to make it into a family story. The other thing is that the power of testimony, the power of your own story, and the power of story in general telling a story has far more impact than giving a lecture or talking at people. If you want to demonstrate how, for example, a social injustice or violence against women or any issue, tell it through a story. Talk to someone who's been through that and listen to them and tell their story. That's how it works. Okay, good.
You get writer's block. What technique do you utilize to kind of go over it?
As a journalist or as a book writer, because they're kind of different.
Book writer?
As a book writer, what I would do is just start anywhere. Don't start from the beginning. Like just begin somewhere. Because I think what we're waiting for that perfect first sentence. You're waiting for that moment with it, and you think everything's going to flow from that one sentence. But I think if you start somewhere, just anywhere in the middle towards the end, and work your way up and down. Because now with word processing is that it's easy to scroll up and down. So if you have a writer's block, do that. The second thing I do is actually don't fight it. If nothing is coming out, like nothing, don't torture yourself. There is an aspect as journalism, if you have a deadline, that's a different thing. But if you're much more flexible, just don't torture yourself, and instead take the evening off, take the day off, read something that inspires you, or watch Breaking Bad or something. Watch something that is really well done and inspiring, and then come back to it the next day. I mean, just avoid torturing yourself. Well, sure, but sorry. If you have a deadline, you may have to lower your standards a little bit and start somewhere as well. And like if you want to start from the middle, it's not the perfect thing, but it's better than missing the deadline. It's better to submit the assignment than missing it, especially if you get 0 from the assignment. All right.
Well, many thanks.
Thank you so much.